We good? Cool. Testing it, testing it. Oh, damn. Good system, good system. All right. Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm Paulo. This is Sam and Magdaleno, and we're with the K-Town local of the LA Tenants Union. Hey, nice. Thank you. Yeah, so we're here to present Gentrification 101. Really, what we're trying to accomplish with this presentation is just working through a definition of what gentrification is for us from much of what we've learned through struggle. And we hope to communicate a lot of this to you, as well as some examples of things that we've seen in our own organizing, but also in other people's organizing, other organizing that's happened within the tenants union, and also some historical stuff that's happened primarily in LA. So to begin with, we want to, can we go to the next one? We want to start with an exercise. Oh, sorry.
I just want to shout out all the tenant organizers in the room too. You know, Zarita, Don, Erica, Inglewood. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Yeah, so we want to start with a little exercise. So first, if you can form groups of 4, and what we want to do is,
How many people we got? How many people we got? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We got 20 plus-ish around, so like 5 groups.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, like 5 groups of 4. Introduce yourselves, get to know each other, your name, your neighborhood. If you've come with someone, try to, be with other people, meet someone new. And then we want to talk about the following questions. And hopefully, have someone writing down your answers and prepare to share back after we finish the exercise. So go ahead and let's start forming some groups. Huh? All right, let's count it off. Yeah, let's start over here.
So 1 through 5, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Adam, where you go? 1, 1. All right, so let's see. 1 over here, 2 over there, 3, 4, and you guys figure it.
All right, let's take like 10 minutes, 10, yeah.
Oh, people will be coming in, so I'm gonna be there to tell them. All right, I'll get more. Only feedback that I have so far is that it's hard to start talking about gentrification when you don't have a definition of it. And I know that people are already struggling with that, so this may help to start off with the definition of gentrification. Yeah. No, I think it's yeah. We'll hear it. I guess when you talk about it.
Hey, everybody. If you haven't already, let's move on to question two. And we're going to be wrapping up in like 5 minutes. All right. Hey everyone. If you haven't already, now let's try to move on to question 3 and 4. Question 3 and 4. 5 more minutes. All right.
One more minute and then we'll report back. One more minute. All right, let's bring it back to order and let's hear what people had to say.
Disconnect.
Let's come back, come back.
Connected.
We can, I guess yeah, you can also discuss it from where you're at too, but maybe we could actually start with group 5 and go backwards. Or whoever wants to go first. Who wants to go first? Which group? Who's ready? All right, group 5. So, what did y'all discuss?
We talked about how is gentrification happening where we live. Well, I live in Boyle Heights, and well, so I've been living there for up to 20 years. I've seen like all the changes that's been going on. When they started with the Metro Rail, the Gold Line. Also, when a lot of the businesses, there was this one supermarket store that was called Big Buy, and it's been a Walgreens since 2008, I believe. And a lot of the local businesses have been uh, they weren't able to keep up with the rising cost of inflation throughout the year, so they were either bought out or they sold their businesses or went out bankrupt. Who well, that kind of covers like who was affected. Like, the only one they wanted to cover all.
Okay. Thank you. Businesses coming and going and people of 20 years leaving. Who wants to say perhaps we discussed aspects that are noticeable. What about unnoticeable aspects of gentrification? Or you want to go for it?
Hello, good evening. Shout out to Cat's laptop over here. Okay, the question was, excuse me, what parts do you think are not as noticeable? So our group number 3, we wrote down, for example, the air quality, pollution. Um, there's statistically significant communities where there's higher pollution. We talked about oil refineries, coal mills, where it's specifically designed where the pollution is going to harm those communities, typically communities of color. Also, we spoke about not noticeable behind the scenes colluding between landlords. Someone talked about that information from our group and isolation from the community. And then we also just talked about the big banks and predatory lending interest rates that led to the housing market crash. But just to be aware of continuing processes through the banking that leads to driving out community members. Turn it back over. Thank you.
All right, let's do another group for the second question. Who wants to go with the second question? Group that hasn't gone yet. All right, let's do it.
I'm on behalf of Group 4. So who or what is affected by gentrification? I mean, everyone here is affected by gentrification. If you rent, you're probably renting for more, or rather you're paying more for rent. Your groceries are more expensive. Your job probably isn't paying you as much as it was, relatively speaking, in the past, 10 years ago. Wages just haven't gone up. So on the bottom end, everyone's experiencing it. Who is also affected by it? Capital's affected by it, but also the state as well too. Like, the higher rents you're paying are going to someone, or they're going to some corporation that's making a fuck ton of money on all of us struggling. But the state is also enforcing that as well too. Like, these landlords can't keep demanding more rent without the cops enforcing these evictions or enforcing all of these activities that harass us, basically. So I think we're all generally affected by gentrification.
Thank you so much. All right, and let's finish up strong. What's another group for number 4? Question 4. Stronger.
Hi, everyone. I'm speaking on behalf of Group 2. And I have an anecdote actually for number 4. This comes from Anthony from Lenox or the greater Inglewood area. He pointed out something really interesting. I mean, essentially, really, it's the ruling class, it's people with more money that's essentially causing it. But one situation in particular kind of struck me as poignant. And he mentioned that 5 public schools have closed in recent years in the area. And it's being largely, I guess, blamed for low enrollment rates, but that's essentially because of high rents and increasing rents driving people out of the neighborhood. And then compound that with rich folks like Dr. Dre, who's actually building a charter school in the area. So it's just, increasing these contradictions, these disparities of income. And so that's pretty bleak. So yeah, I found that interesting. Just a little case study.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for the answers. All right, we got a good analysis from different neighborhoods, different angles hit. Right now, we're going to try to move on and try to wrap all of this up and try to theorize it a little more and think through it together. So I'm gonna pass it on to Magdalena.
Thank you, Pablo. Thank you. Yeah, just like Pablo said, it's very clear that we're in a room full of very intelligent people, full of like a lot of already collected wisdom on this issue, not only intellectually, but it seems like a lot of lived experience as well, right? Well, I think for all of us. So we're up here. We're not necessarily experts on the subject. We're not scholars on the subject, right? We're residents of the city. And our wisdom comes out of mainly our experience organizing, right? But certainly not experts. So we're gonna try our best. Now, in terms of we have here gentrification, and we're trying to arrive at a collective definition of this together. And you guys have already taken the first step. Seems, again, we already have a lot of knowledge. So let's deepen it a little bit. And to help us think through that, through all the things that we're going to be learning today, we have this little subtitle right here, Whose Crisis? And it felt to me like, when we were doing our first round right now of thoughts on gentrification, it seems very evident and obvious that it's a crisis that's affecting us, right? People were talking about the way that it affects us as a community, right? Rents are very high, wages are low, small businesses, etc., right? So it clearly affects all of us. It's a crisis that we're facing, right? But we want to keep thinking about what maybe it's, a crisis that we're facing, but perhaps an opportunity to change things as well, right? So we want to think through, yes, on one side crisis, and another side, how can we fight it and what can we do about it, right? So let's think through that. But to start off, Kat, if we can go to the next slide, thank you. So in the spirit, again, of arriving at these definitions, not so much through a hyper-scholarly approach, but instead working definitions that are grounded in the experiences on the ground of the community. The Los Angeles Tenants Union has more or less a standard definition that we use in the union of gentrification. So if you're looking for a definition that's very sort of concise and one that we feel pretty proud of, it might be this definition. And this definition of gentrification as the displacement and for profit came out of a long sort of sequence involving research, but also a lot of sort of listening sessions with the community to try to understand what this working definition helps us do a lot, and we're going to keep unpacking it. So, Kat, let's go to the next one. Thank you so much. And part of that, so the School of Echoes, which was a sort of collective out of which LA Tenants Union emerges, developed that working definition of gentrification. and also along a list of theses. It has 10 theses on sort of this syllabus, this reader on gentrification in 2018. And so for our presentation, we're basically going to be kind of remixing insights that were that are in that sort of packet that sort of again contributes to the founding of the LA Tenants Union. That are some of the theses that are part of that packet, and at the same time some further elaboration for today. And so let's see. Can I get a volunteer to read the theses out loud just so we can all hear it? Thank you. With a strong voice. Okay. The theses. All three. Yeah. Thesis number 1. Thesis number 2.
Gentrification is not community improvement. Gentrification is not revitalization. Gentrification is collective trauma.
Thank you, Adam. And the reason why I asked for it is because you can tell that it's a bit of there's a slogan-like quality to these theses, right? They're working theses. They're actionable theses. So along with all of that, I think you guys are already very well aware that there's plenty of narratives out there about gentrification that are not necessarily like the ones that we heard in this initial go-around. There's a lot of narratives that sell it as something productive, something positive for the community, right? So these first 3 theses are dedicated to unpacking that and basically destroying that side of the argument, right? So we understand gentrification as not an answer to the issues of community that usually are talked about, crime or unsafe streets or whatever, right? Poor living conditions, etc. This is usually what's sold, right? Is that to fix that, we need more money coming in, we need different, better people coming in, perhaps, right? It's very racialized language, right? We need different, better people coming in. We need, and it remixes, and this is going to become more and more relevant later in the presentation, it remixes with arguments around housing and how housing is in a crisis. And so what we need is more building of more housing, right? And more developments to sort of create a booming economy that replenishes the housing stock and moves us forward, right? And so what we understand is that, in fact, gentrification is not the answer to those things in the way that they try to sell it. Certainly the issues exist, but this is the way that they're selling it only exacerbate those issues. And so then what we see is, and then there's a famous sort of bit of data in the way that up here on the slide you can see there are more empty housing units than homeless people in Los Angeles. How could it be that the housing stock is too low when in fact this is the truth, right? It's very clear that the housing system is not just a game of supply and demand, is that there are moneyed interests making it happen in the way that it is. And so then, so to address the final part here, what we see is that gentrification really just reproduces those issues that people are taking issue with. So it creates more homelessness, right? It creates, it destabilizes communities. It forces people into poorer living conditions because you still have to have poor working people in the city, right? But the more you inject sort of these higher class types, you just widen the inequality that's already present in the city, and you make it worse and more precarious for those at the bottom, right? So the problem doesn't go away. Actually, it just deepens. Although for some people, for a hipster coming into Silver Lake or whatever, oh, it's paradise. Oh, it's great. Oh, cool. So the problem sometimes cosmetically, right, to certain people, right, but it deepens otherwise where those people might not choose to see, right? So constant question for us is gentrification. If it's supposed to be an answer to community issues, we have to ask for whom, right? Perhaps it is for some, but for whom? And we'll find that for many others, it is not. Is there anything else that you guys want to add right now? No. And then the final one, which is important and it'll sort of resurface, is there's a lot of pro-gentrification arguments, right? And so right now this slide is just trying to deconstruct them, right? But there's also a lot of arguments, even from sympathetic people that are anti-gentrification and so on, right? That kind of make the problem easier than it actually is, which is to say that it's rich white people choosing to come and take over our communities, right? Which is a little, I put not simply. There's something to that perhaps, but the bigger picture is larger structural forces that are pushing this into reality. So that's also really, really important. So let's look at those structural issues that we're talking about. Kat, if we can. Oh, it's cool. It's cool. All right. So sorry for the wordy slide here. We're gonna get through this first slog of kind of a theoretical overview of gentrification. So hopefully it helps us then think a little later. We're gonna get a little more grounded, a little bit more into real experiences that we've experienced. But right now we're gonna go through this sort of heavy slog a little bit, okay? And what we're looking at is, can someone read out the theses again? Again, these sort of slogans. Erica, go.
Number 4, gentrification relies on prior divestment from low-income communities and others. Number 5, gentrification is speculation framed as redevelopment. Number 6, gentrification promotes economic growth over the stability and well-being of citizens.
Thank you very much. So what we're seeing is that they'll sell it a certain way. This is for the community's interest. This is to redevelop. This is etc. Or this is just people, market forces, rational consumers make their choices, and this just kind of happens, right? But when we look beyond that and we look underneath that, sorry. What we find is very much a class project, a structurally imposed class project that is the result of the extension of the logic of capital, which seeks to expand value above any other requirement, right? Above human needs, above etc. So following this logic of capital is obviously the prerogative of the class agents like the landlords, the developers, the capitalists, of course, and various other agents that may not be directly class agents, like the city planners, like city officials, urban planners, and even nonprofits as well. The city, would you say it's not technically a capitalist, but would you say that the relationship is closer than it seems? Absolutely, right? And so then these forces come together, right? Often, and this is very important to understand gentrification not as a sort of natural market process, but instead something that requires collaboration across different or with different class agents and class actors. And so then these different class actors, which not always have the same interests, sometimes have slightly different interests. And also the city, right, plays this weird game, and we're familiar with it. And so, all of these different interests sometimes don't fully come together and sometimes do, but more than not come together to identify the neighborhood as something in need of redevelopment, right? Gentrification, to pursue the project of gentrification. It's a very intentional structural class project. And the last thing I'll say is, we'll skip this quote, one of the quotes at least. But Paula, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something real quick. Has anyone ever heard of the concept organized abandonment? Raise your hands if you have. Okay, we got 1, 2, we got a few. Okay. Any of you want to share what it means to you, organized abandonment, what you've heard? All right, let's go.
I think I remember in school, in college, that they gave us a reading, and that was like one of the researchers' term, I guess, for it. But honestly, I don't remember the exact term, but it reminds me of like disenfranchisement, basically, like a city government disenfranchisement, but at different levels. And it's on purpose, and it's intentional, and it's not accidental. But that's my guess.
That's perfect. That's great. Yeah, I think that's the thing that I wanted to convey when sharing this concept. Is it's something that we can easily remind, and I think part of what we want to do here is share some tools. Some things that you can remember when you go out there and you're thinking about how to analyze this thing called gentrification that is so elusive. And so that's a good way of thinking about it. The intentionality behind the process is what we kind of try to say when we say a class project. There's a structural intentionality to it, right? So it's organized. It's an abandonment. It's a leaving behind of something, right, of our neighborhood or something by certain forces and a disenfranchisement or whatever it is that we want, a leaving behind organized in a certain way. Sometimes very intentional, like this particular business saying, okay, I'm out of here. Like I'm done with this neighborhood. It's whatever, for some reason, I can make more money in some other place. I'm out. Sometimes it's certain public investments that are leaving, and then because of this leaving of the neighborhood, then other particular forces within it, certain, maybe we can talk about businesses again, but maybe wealthier residents, usually white affluent residents, start leaving, like a white flight kind of situation, right? So I think organized abandonment is a good way of thinking about this class project in a intentional kind of way.
And it's a very, very good way to lead into this little concept that we do want to center is how precisely we were talking about, organized abandonment, the way that communities, working class communities are left to, are abandoned, right? And, we asked why might that take place? Well, if we understand the logic of capital, there's more profits to be had somewhere else, right? And so then that's what's pulling people regularly to abandon certain sites, right? But then what happens is that the longer you leave a place abandoned, so to speak, the more its value plummets, right? The more its value, the higher, the bigger the gap between if you're able to come back to that neighborhood, kick those people out, right? And make new developments in the area. Now all of a sudden, the value, which is the average elsewhere, you can now come back to that average. Does that make sense to people? So sort of, yeah. Let's get the graph going. So, yeah, let's take a second. Let's look at this graph, and then I'll ask someone if someone is able to articulate kind of what's going on here. So let's take a second and look at it, thinking about it in the way that we were sort of trying to describe it. And as soon as anyone is able to help us out, understand, interpret the graph, all right, we got it. That didn't take too long.
I think what you're saying is like, if a place is left alone long enough and organized abandonment, and it gets cheap enough, then the prices of the property are low enough where people with capital and resources can come in, buy it, flip it, and the surrounding like average market rate for properties is high enough so that the profit margin becomes worth it to come back in, buy it, flip it, and resell it. Is that right?
Where in the phase of organized abandonment, where would you locate that phase of organized abandonment in this graph? Anyway, what was that? I think it's a weird, funky graph. It took me a while to I'm like, wait, hang on, what? No, I didn't make it. I wish. Maybe here. That's like when the value is at its lowest. And the gap, or maybe actually here, the gap is at its highest, right? So you've abandoned it sufficiently that if you come back, suddenly your profits are, you're able to profit a lot more. Does that make sense to people? Any questions right now on that? So again, the class project that we were talking about, it's looking for those value gaps. Makes sense. Okay. Oh yeah.
What I'm having trouble understanding, like what's going on at that inflection point where it starts going up, like um. No. Maybe.
Well, I think at a certain point, you've gotten all the value from something that's not really conducive to human needs. You know, eventually the money, the profit dries up.
Also, it's important to note that the graph is technically not just value gap, but also rent gap. And it's sort of trying to visualize also that, well, this is what we know is when someone, and I know the graph is kind of, but it's also a very common experience that we all know and understand that, when someone is able to evict a tenant out of a building, you can raise the rent a lot more, right? And so then those are the value gaps, those are the rent gaps that our class enemies take advantage of. And this is why they have so much motivation constantly to pursue evictions, displacement, gentrification. Yes. Maybe. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's more or less the case. And it's also that for a long time, it's not very profitable to invest in those communities. So you let them just kind of, it's not like conspiratorial necessarily, right? But there's a rational logic that I'm not going to invest in those communities, right? And then that just deepens up to the point where actually the rational logic is I want to reinvest in those communities. Does that make sense? Final question, because we do got to kind of.
I have to argue that it actually is conspiratorial.
A little bit, yeah, definitely.
It requires the state.
No,
It
absolutely.
requires capital, and it requires them to act collectively to alienate all of us.
Yeah, I was gonna add that. Yeah, no. There is an element to that, and I think something that we see, for example, policies like the opportunity zones, right? When there's actual political projects at the city level, state level, federal level that motivate, incentivize investment, but at a point where maybe it's convenient even for certain other forces, right? Maybe the state has seen that there is a necessity for that for a particular reason, for maybe, well, precisely for furthering capital and profit development, right? But yeah, do we move on to? Oh, we'll keep taking questions after.
So what's next? All right, we're down to the last. There was a 10 theses document, so we're down to the last 3 theses. Then we got another slide and then a break. All right, so we're almost there. Let's do it again. Let's read out the theses again. If someone can volunteer. It's contained just there. We don't really have to elaborate, right? Boom, 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 boom. But if I have to elaborate, because I'm up here. Well, let's look back a little bit. We were talking about the class project, the organized abandonment, right? So then so we understand it's the pursuit of profits, right? But why through this? Why development and why urban development? Why is this becoming so central for capitalists to invest in? So part of the logic how we understand it is a historical logic that has occurred across the phases of capital, where when Marx was writing his stuff, for a very long time, profits for a capitalist economy were based on the things that we produced in factories. And most of us as workers were in factories. That's where we organized, right? That's where we got to know each other, where we got to talk and fight against our class enemy, the boss, namely, and then onto the state. But the new conjuncture of capital, without getting too gnarly, as far as how we understand it, is the rate of profits for industry have decreased globally. And this is a very long, complicated history, but it is the case. And so then now what we are seeing is that profits are are gained more through financial speculation rather than industrial production. Or that is, industrial production is not producing it anymore, so we've elaborated very, very elaborate techniques to be able to keep producing profit, right? And so then this turn from industry to finance has also seen workplaces becoming much more disorganized in today's world. We're not all working in the same factory. That reduces our ability to sort of organize in the workplace now that we're in very like precarious and atomized sort of workplace. Obviously, workplace organizing still exists, and it's very, very crucial and a very big factor in our society. But there is a lot of gig work. There is a lot of informal work, right? And also, even for the poor, the more the poor are pushed lower and lower, the more there's an informal economy that's growing. There's and a variety of other changes in our work landscape. And so then what's going on is that the rate of profit for work sort of based profit making is reduced. And so then what is happening is that finance is being sort of elaborated to speculate on the asset of housing, housing and development in the neighborhood, which can keep sort of profits at somewhat of a fictional high, and that can then keep capital afloat. And so then there is this incentive to keep sort of almost a constant urban renewal process is becoming the name of the game for capital. And this is why real estate is becoming almost the primary, the dominant force amongst capital. So then along with that, as we saw the value gaps, right? Those are also rent gaps. And so rent is becoming very key as a source of profit for the capitalists. So then with all of that, understanding all of that, the basic analysis that we have is that it's one of our slogans that we have sometimes in our protests. La renta sube, sube, el pueblo sufre, sufre, which is basically just the rent goes high, and the people go, or the people suffer, not the people go down, but the people suffer. As higher the rent goes, the more people suffer, right? And so then it's what's happening is that this speculative project, the speculative class project to gain profits from evicting people, reshaping communities, right? All of that is a organized class project that is squeezing us, right? So back to the crisis. That's what's creating the crisis for the working class right now, primarily. Our jobs suck, our jobs squeeze us, but the rent, man, it's getting intolerable, even more intolerable, right? So let's move on to the next slide. And this will be one of the final slides is for this section. So ultimately what we're looking at again is that because the neighborhood is becoming the most prized asset of the capitalist class, and the one that they're most violently sort of targeting, what we're seeing is that they are the labor that goes on in producing our neighborhood, even like sort of not just the productive labor, like the work that gets done, but also like sort of the local economies, like think of street vendor economies and so on, right? Like that labor, along with like all of the rest of like sort of socialized care networks and like all these different kinds of things that are making our neighborhoods the way that they are, all of these things are being targeted by the capitalist class in a way that is obviously excessively violent, excessively racialized, right? And it's sort of, they're selling out our neighborhoods either to new higher class people, which involves sometimes a very racialized process, right? For example, I remember seeing like the gentrification of Highland Park and the way it went from a predominantly Latino working class neighborhood, and it's still has a lot of Latino working class people in the neighborhood, but it's also seen a very, very violent, injection of different higher class white people, some of whom are so violently indifferent to that process, right? Um, and what's going on is a crisis, but at the same time, it may very well be that, because remember, the rent is fucking us all over, right? And all of these processes are constantly interrupting our lives, right? What's happening is that the struggle is now coming to the home. The struggle is coming to the neighborhood, not just the workplace. And the workplace is part of the neighborhood, right? But so is our most intimate social relationships, so is all our schools, so is all of these things, right? And so then now it's getting really, really big. The stakes are our lives now, are every inch, every element of our lives, right? And so then that's horrible, but at the same time, it's giving us an opportunity perhaps to organize to defend the totality of our lives, everything that happens in our neighborhood, not just the workplace, but all the different facets, right? Very quickly, this is a picture of the mariachi strike, led by Unión de Vecinos, the East Side local of the Los Angeles Tenants Union. And I would love to. We're going to go into just more experiences in a bit, but just like as a quick thing, this involved not only the defense of tenants being threatened with eviction, or being threatened with extremely high rent increases that would then evict them. This was not only an issue of that. This was also an issue of the cultural life in the neighborhood, because this was the mariachis that made Boyle Heights so famous, right? And so then it was a defense of the integrity of the neighborhood, not just the tenants, right? Let's go ahead to the last slide to finish it off. This section is the final thing. Then this is a picture from our march last year, December 3rd, and yeah, it's very cool. How many people went? How many people went? I don't know. How many people went? Who went here? Some people went. Yeah, we're there. Oh yeah, I see you. I see. Nah, just. Um, so and I chose this picture too because you see the LA landscape behind, right? There's them and there's us, right? And so then drawing the lines in the sand within our territory, within our neighborhoods, within our city is what this moment gives us, however bad in a crisis that it is, and it is a crisis, and it is the displacement and replacement of the poor. But we are living in it, right? It's not just a fact. It's not a fact in the textbooks, right? It's not foregone. We're in the middle of it, right? And so then that means that in the middle we can act to change that, to stop that, right? And so then the crisis for us has to be theorized and thought about as something that can be acted upon, not something that's just going to be a Merriam-Webster's definition of gentrification. I don't give a fuck about that. What I care about is that thing that is happening. How can I stop it? How can I fight it and win over it? So whatever, you can read that, but our task ultimately, the way that we understand it, is to help us define gentrification so that we can so that it's not just an experience of crisis for us, but it's a crisis for them, right? Because it's the moment where we wake up, we understand the stakes of struggle, and we take over. So that concludes this. You guys want to add anything?
I think right now we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back with the second half. All right? Just get some water, some air outside if you need to get some air. Okay, there's cold water in the fridge too. All right, everybody, let's come back. Let's come back. We're about to get started again. You want to start off the second half?
Yeah, sure. Can you call the people outside? You're gonna miss out. It's gonna get spicy. Could we go to the next slide? All right, so welcome back. Welcome back. This whole thing is about some working definition of gentrification. And what's the point of a definition? Hopefully, it's instructive. Hopefully, it gives us clarity on what we need to do. So, we have another one here. It's going to define the rest of the presentation. Gentrification as the war against rent control. Because we did win that at some point in our history in LA, in the state. We did win rent control. And it's not like as a class, we were just totally defenseless for a century and didn't manage to exploit the political opportunity in front of us. So in LA, yes, we had rent control. Does anyone know the origin story of rent control in Los Angeles? Damn. How many of y'all live in housing with some form of rent control, price control? A lot of y'all. It's very, very essential, right? So the rent control started, I think, in like the 40s in LA. Something was going on politically in the world at the time in the 40s. We were in World War II. And the opportunity there was that the war obviously puts a strain on people at home. And the people were able to galvanize and say, hey, look, like, we can't be fighting this war. We can't be missing work. We can't bad economy while fighting the war and still have to or still have to pay. So they were able to exploit that, the people, us, right, and of the state to be okay. We're gonna give you guys rent control if you guys can keep fighting this war, and that's sort of the nature of social change, right? We're able to articulate our demands as people in opportune times. But of course, we don't have peer rent control anymore. We have something else. You help me out. You guys know what this is? Yes, Zarita. Yes, yes. What's the difference? You could answer again, but I genuinely want to see what people know. Like, what's the difference? Versus, well, right. Versus pure rent control is that you can't raise it at all, regardless of whether or not they move out. The rent stabilization ordinance, you can raise a certain percentage every year, and you can raise it all the way to whatever you want if the tenant is evicted, moves out. So that's a clear slap in the face, right, of what rent control is. And why did that happen? Can anyone guess why that happened? Neoliberal policies pushed real estate lobby, exactly. So the power of the people watered down at some point, and something called, the modern iteration of it now is AGLA, Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles, has the form and the power to articulate and demand and get that, versus us as a political expression. We lost that, or maybe we just didn't have it. So that's the framing. We should move on to the next slide. I think another key aspect of when we're talking about gentrification, this is something to jog your thoughts. What is this? What is this image? It's something specific. It's a specific place in LA. I'll give you a hint. What's that? Yeah, exactly. It is the redevelopment of Jordan Downs. Yeah. So Jordan Downs is, of course, one of the original public housing projects in LA. I think like 2 years ago, they announced that they were going to demolish a lot of it and mix it in, basically do like mixed use type of stuff. When we talk about affordable housing, obviously public housing is like the cream of the crop, but what do people think when you say public housing? Slum, right? And what was that? Low quality, slum. And what did we just discuss earlier in the first half? Organized abandonment, right? Slumification. We take in this great idea, this great utopian idea of public housing into the United States. I believe from what country kind of did it first? Europe. Public housing, council housing, I think, something like that. And we build it, and then we immediately abandon it, and we immediately put, in this war against poor people, we force people to live in slums. We'll give you this, and the logic of capital does not yield neighborhoods that benefit those people. So there's a great piece by our comrade Jacob Wucher. He's in the West Side Local of the LA Tenants Union in Knock LA. It's called LA's War on Public Housing, the Era of Demolition and Privatization, that I highly recommend for additional reading. But when we talk about rent control, we talk about price control on housing and having housing not be in the speculative market. Uh, we need to understand what happened to public housing, which has suffered a very slow and painful death over the past several decades, with people being displaced, people being forced to live in really bad conditions. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, what? Wait, where are wasn't there 2 slides before this? We didn't send it to her?
We edited here.
Well, you can tell them to skip to the next.
Well,
I mean, I can say a little bit about it.
did you send them like the live link or just like the?
No, I don't
Okay.
think so.
All right.
I can talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, I can set it up. Yeah. Well, I think the slides in between. Well, I'll just say here. I think we're talking about the war on rent control. Rent control turned into the shitty RSO that we have now. And actually, let's just go to the go to the yeah. All right, so these are things that have weakened rent control. This body represents rent control, and this leaf is its armor. And then hit the space bar again. All right, so yeah, cash for keys is an example of something where people who live in rent stabilized apartments are forced out. They get a little buyout, and then they're forced to leave what was essentially a price controlled apartment. Hit the space bar again. You want to explain ED1? Executive Directive 1 is something that Karen Bass, and it's a current thing happening right now where essentially developers get a permit to, the broad qualification to build affordable housing. They displace everyone to convert RSO into affordable housing. And then the Ellis Act is something very similar. Hit the space bar again. If a landlord wants to how do I explain this? Do you want to explain it? Oh yeah, because it's a lot. Yeah, if a landlord wants to go out of business and pretend that they don't have to, or they don't want to be a landlord anymore, then they get licensed to just like evict someone. But then they can easily re-enter the market as like a affordable housing developer. So these are several things that have weakened what we have now. Next slide, please. Oh, okay. All right, so let me rewind a little bit. Oh yeah, we can redo the knife thing. There was something really important about that Watts image that I forgot to mention. Something historical happened in Watts. Yeah, there was we call it a capitalist crisis, right? Where when we think about what capitalism produces, it is a system that creates opportune crises every so often because it's not designed sustainable. It's not a sustainable system, so it gets to a point where the working classes say we literally have to fight and fuck shit up in order to get what we need to survive. So that happened in Watts, and then what happened in the top right image here. Yeah. Right. It's another riot. It's the Rodney King riots. It's the '92. So it's not a coincidence that riots happen every so often, right? What happens after a crisis occurs is that the city of LA has to save face. They have to respond to whenever we riot. They have to answer to that, right? So they actually did what Stockton did in its recent history. It decided their solution was to build a glitzy sports arena, which is what is currently the crypto arena. But it was a Staples Center, and
Yeah. Um, some of the things that we also wanted to highlight with this is all the connections Sam was bringing up that connect through history, but then also the particular moments as well, right? Like with Chavez Ravine. This is Chavez Ravine. The displacement is Palo. I know that there's comrades that are invested in organizing and bringing back the history in order for us to not only hear it and read about it, but also to understand it as we rework our definition of gentrification, right? And so they definitely invest a lot of time in telling us it's not Chavez Ravine, it's Palo Verde, and then a couple other names that constituted the territory. I don't remember the other names, but let's talk about Chavez Ravine, right? I mean, it was in the 50s, and what it was built, it was the displacement occurred because of Dodger Stadium, right? It was talk to me, Erica. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, no.
And then all of a sudden shit happened and blah, blah, forgot or whatever, and then all of a sudden instead of Fulton County, he ended up the stadium. Sorry, love the doctors, but that stadium.
No, this is something actually that we also want to talk about is Dodger Stadium, the Staples Center. We're thinking Dodgers, we're thinking Lakers, we're thinking the Rams now, right? And all of these different stadiums, we have to consider the fact that they develop, they destroy, they displace, but they also use something else to solve the contradictions that might develop, as a consequence lead into riots or lead into protest or more organized action. One of the things that is deployed in this is basically the enthusiasm of the masses for sports, right? I mean, I love sports. I love soccer. A lot of us are very interested in a lot of sports, and the working classes, the popular classes, are invested in these things, like many other people. But at the same time, we have to understand this as the other side of the coin, right? What else is happening behind this history? So it's important to think about this. And yeah, like Erika was saying, to highlight that it was supposed to be public housing with the promise of those that were displaced that they would return. Something similar, if we fast forward to the 90s with the Staples Center, there was organizing happening in Figueroa, and I believe also Stockton, right? And this area in downtown, in the southern area of downtown, where Staples Center was about to get built, LA Live, there was organizing happening, and yet there were blocks beginning to form, alliances beginning to form, and let's remember the class project that we were talking about. The alliances that form city conspiratorially, we could say, right, a little bit structurally, conspiratorially, beginning to wanting to revitalize downtown. Why? Because it had been, according to them, ran down. It was no longer what it was, the slums and all of these things that we've been discussing. It needed an injection of something, and that's when they begin to make alliances with private capital and developers to glitzify, right, downtown and the city. And so we end up having Staples Center, LA Live, and even though we could say, well, it was just an alliance between state and developers. There was an element of organizing happening, and a little bit of that organizing got channeled into emerging nonprofits, which is something we'll discuss more in the next slides. But basically, this block of nonprofits ended up cushioning the struggle a little bit. And so what other things ended up passing instead of having the people stay, something that was called community benefit agreements started emerging as a solution to this, right? So we'll allow for the development to happen, but we'll give people work, jobs, but the people will have to leave, whatever, etc. Promises that some were maybe fulfilled, but a lot of them were not, right? So we see the history repeating itself. Next slide. All right. Should we just skip it?
So we're kind of discussing two things at the same time. One that Pablo's talking about, community benefits agreement, where there's an incentive to develop more as long as the developer has some sort of consciousness about not replicating slums again, right, in some way. But that has an effect of undermining the rent control that we had. And these are two specifically K-Town things that have happened that are examples of rent control dying in favor of this, this development addiction that they have. K3, big corporate landlord. This is a table of, it's like 30, I don't know, if you count the buildings, like those are all the buildings and all the rent control tenants that are being displaced. They've literally put it in a table. So this is something that's happening in the background. Another thing that's happening is an RSO apartment building being demolished in order to build a hotel that has some percentage of affordable housing units in it that are not actually affordable, that will actually increase speculation in the neighborhood. And it's a city approved. There's a cushion. There's a cushion of the developer saying, I'm building affordable housing. This is what is, it's not the same as a developer saying, I'm going to build a glitzy sports arena, but developer can get away with a lot by saying, oh, I'm building affordable housing. Next slide. On the left is an article from 2020 that still rings very true. I think this year we're actually going to go really hard with this message called affordable housing is a scam, because I think that continues to define the moment that we're in. A lot of tenants that we organize with are being actively displaced by projects that are labeled affordable housing that are not really affordable. And this image right here, Hillside Via Tenants Association in Chinatown. I don't know if we've already said this or just for the sake of being repetitive. That's the latest in the series of from Chavez Ravine, displaced for Dodger Stadium, for downtown being displaced for Staples Center. This is a historic building in Chinatown that was built with like the low income housing tax credit that says affordability is going to expire in 55 years. And in that year, 2019, that was around the time that the affordability expired, and now they're all facing evictions. That is an undermining of rent control. Building housing that's affordable only for a temporary amount of time, that's something that we have to unequivocally reject. And the thing on the right refers to the H Hotel campaign that we had, because again, RSO building destroyed for a hotel with affordable housing units that expire in X amount of years. It's usually 55 years, sometimes it's less. Next slide. What? What? Oh, okay. Just enjoy the meme. But I will note that a lot of the people who are blocking permanent affordability stuff, such for example, Ann Sewell, who is the head of the housing department, and she's rejecting a lot of this stuff. She comes from developers. So and the yeah, yeah. We can go to the next slide.
All right. So this is a little graph we made. Just like with the organized abandonment concept, we just want to hand out tools, right? Tools for analysis, for our own critical analysis. This is our own kind of like uh, putting the coordinates and like different actors in certain locations, right? But we have an axis. First, this one right here, the horizontal one. On one end, we have popular power, and on the other one, elite power, right? So we can think about developers, etc. Like, and here we're trying to think about the class project angle, the urban class warfare angle that we're trying to give to gentrification, right? So if we're thinking about classes, we can get into a whole debate over that, but ultimately what we want to try to think about concretely is just like in the first slide on the exercise that we did, who or what is behind it, right? Who or what is behind gentrification at a particular moment in time, right? And in a particular location. And how can we think about how do we identify them in relation to each other? So if we think about this side, right? We're thinking about all the elite actors, but we don't have to just think about, okay, these are all the bad people or whatever, right? But we also have to think strategically about, in a particular moment, again, when are they thinking about their long-term interest? When are they thinking about their short-term interest? And how are these different sides of the spectrum positioning actors in relation to each other again, right? So if I'm thinking about building something here, a new hotel or a new state. Okay, if I'm thinking about a new hotel, what alliances does this actor need to form versus thinking about a stadium, right? Where we think it's a different type of project, a different scale. We have to trace the different positions and the different relations between all of these. So yeah, so what we wanted to put some of the people that we've organized against, right? So on this side, we'll talk about more about Hillside Villa, but this is Tom Botts, the landlord in Hillside Villa. K3, this is something that landlord and that K3, the K3 Tenant Council and the K-Town Local has been organizing against for a long time. Jameson Commercial, a developer, major developer in Koreatown. But we also want to think about the way in which particular landlords form their own organizing in a way, right? Their own lobbying, their own groups. So we put here oh wait, no, this is not it. That's that one right there. The Apartment Association, right, of Greater LA, major lobbying group in Los Angeles. Also thinking about city council and the housing department and the way in which the state looks after the long-term interest of some of these actors who might be in competition with each other on the short term, right? I think when we talked about gentrification, we talked about what could be an obstacle for it. Oh, well, capitalists themselves might be an obstacle to each other. If they want to outbid each other in competition with each other, they struggle with each other in some ways. But we also, on the short term, but then we also have to think about the way in which, in the long term, the state and other different actors might look after those alliances, so that with a particular objective in mind, right?
No, I just thought of in the first slide we talked about gentrification as a battleground between different class forces, and here you can sort of see if we just name landlords and that side of the spectrum as a big cartel, a big gang. Who are we going to team up with, and in what times are we going to team up? And and here in the red circle, we named what we just named as developers having the cushioning to build quote unquote affordable housing developments. That's sort of this is a sort of clique that has emerged in the current moment of nonprofits and affordable housing developers. And we can't, we can't generalize nonprofits as being one way or another. And that's, I don't think, it's not to say that like we can't work with nonprofits ever, but I think it's something to keep in mind that there are nonprofit developers. There are nonprofits who work to indirectly harm rent control. So that's an important thing to click to focus on.
You know, this may be a little abstract, but I really like this graph here, because I think it's pretty a little bit, but also because I think I'm speaking in a room more or less, I think probably filled with socialists, right? And I think as socialists, sometimes we think about things a little bit too abstractly. Well, the system is our enemy, right? Capitalist system, and of course it is. Maybe we go down a little bit, the banks and the landlords, but we're thinking in these broad categories, right? And or maybe big political issues that are going on. That's our enemy, things like that, right? And absolutely 100%. But uh, at the ground level, at the everyday lived experience level of the residents of this city, right here where we all live, right? Capitalism doesn't just exist as a system, it has a face, right? It has groups, it has people, you can see people's faces up there, right? It has people. This city houses our class enemies, right? They have homes that we can go visit, that we regularly go visit, right? And so then waging class struggle isn't just sort of speaking to the clouds or speaking about socialism to people, just in general, but rather waging active class struggle against our enemies. So that's why we have to identify, that's why we have to know and pursue that. So this is why I like the graph.
Should we go to the next slide? I kind of already gave context to what's going on. Chinatown building, a bunch of tenants are getting huge rent increases because the affordability expired, because it was a development that was built to give a big middle finger to rent control. It's something affordability that expires. And I think the only new point I would make here is that a lot of buildings were constructed that way. So it's actually like it's a ticking time bomb for a lot of developments throughout the city that were built as quote unquote affordable housing developments. A lot of them are expiring pretty soon. And the city put together a task force to research and figure out which ones are which ones are reaching the end of their affordability covenant. And basically a lot of people are going to be evicted. So that's something to keep in mind as far as a political opportunity. There's talk about people figuring out the list of these developments and trying to go organize there before the covenant runs out or as people are getting evicted. And what's the whole point of that, of organizing, is to create a spectacle and say, this is what we really need. We need lower rents. We need cleaner streets, etc. Because us as tenants, if we were able to articulate what we really wanted, it would be those things. But instead, we get like a glitzy, quote unquote, affordable housing development, or we get a Staples Center. And who articulated that? Who articulated that on behalf of us? So that's why Hillside Via is such an important project in Lot 2 right now. They're making the demand for the city to buy the building from the landlord. That sounds like public housing, kind of. So it's called eminent domain. That's why it's important. Next slide, please. Does anyone know what happened? Did anyone hear about this? A lot of people were pretty pissed at Lot 2 across the board. So Gil Cedillo, the council person before Eunices, was actually pressured before he stepped down. He did one last good thing in light of all the bad things he's done to get the city council to unequivocally approve eminent domain. The city find money to buy this quote unquote affordable housing thing, that a development that wasn't affordable anymore, so that the state can keep the prices low. And that was a big fight that took 3 years of organizing to get that decision. And basically, fast forward a year later, even though the city council approved it, LAHD, remember the Ann Sewell lady, they said no, like we're not going for that. We're not going to buy the building. And A. Ulysses is you could call her one of our more progressive elected officials in city council. She basically, she's an example, and this isn't, I think we're describing a tendency here. So think of the progressive bloc of city council who preaches like the social housing stuff, who understands the idea of having affordable housing. What's up?
Like basically what she had done is she went to Hillside Media, talked to the tenants over there. She was like, well, I'm working with LAHD and some other people to make sure that we're able to have I guess permanent quarterly covenants and all this other shit. But ultimately she undermined it on behalf of both the city and capital because she wanted to keep her job as an executive.
Yeah. Everyone give Don a Yeah.
It's just fuckery though. Like how do you accept that, DSA promoted this politician, put everything behind her, and now she's willing to sell everyone out for what? So she can keep showing up at events saying, damn fam, sell you out like that? Like what's the vision here?
Yeah, I think I think the running theme in all of this is that tenants need to have an articulation of our own demands, and it's gotten to where nonprofits have to form an alliance with developers to get a seat at the table to make these decisions and to ultimately allow a really bad decision of quote unquote affordable housing programs, things that destroy the price controls on buildings to happen. And yeah, I mean, systemically, politicians like Eunices, in order to keep having that seat at the table, has to buy into these dynamics, and we're not like other more radical countries or whatever where she can actually be held accountable by people, because we're not organized. We don't have people that we can hold accountable in office.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add to that. I mean, I think what we want to say here too is that we were thinking about the long-term interest, right? I think what Eunices would say is like, well, I'm looking after the long-term interest of the tenants. Like, I want to save them, or I want to. Right now, this particular struggle is not something that we have to focus on, because on the long term, I can do something better or whatever, right? But the thing is, just precisely what Sam said. Well, why do you get to decide what the long-term interests are, right? If we haven't developed the democratic structures by which someone like Eunices or whoever can be held accountable to the people, to our people, right? So this is a monopolization of power that we see clearly in the decision making, right? Happening behind closed rooms, closed doors. People don't get to be there, don't get to have representatives that they trust, that they believe in, through an actual infrastructural systemic process that has developed through our struggle, right? Through a popular struggle that sees us having a seat at the table, but not through making concessions of this kind, right? So what we look for in this type of struggle is precisely to bring down that capacity for an elected official, for someone with power to say, but I'm looking after you. Well, who asked you to? Like, did you ask me? Like, did you talk to me? Did you? So for a democratization of the decision making.
Yeah, I got one. So we're just about to finish, and we started a little late. So if you guys want to stick around, we're almost about to finish. But if you wanted to stick around for another 10 minutes or something like that, we can receive some questions for you guys. But just to close us off, just to make us feel, like it all came together. Kat, can you go back a couple slides? I'll tell you when to stop. It's the one where we're our protest in the downtown. Or sorry, right there, right there, right there, right there. So this time around, I am gonna read this little definition up here, and maybe it helps us think through what we wanted to communicate today around gentrification. We've come a long way, right? We were talking gentrification, and then all of a sudden at the end, we got really grounded in today, right? Literally something that happened like 2 weeks ago, or something like that, or something like that. So gentrification, not just a definition on paper, it's something happening right now. The forces exist right now. But so we're seeing and living gentrification as a form of urban class warfare, right? We understand that. These are the blocks. These are the blocks of power against us, right? But then at the same time, it's a little wordy, but this is actively conditioning the insurgency, the uprising of the working class, seeking community control over the land in which we live and work. So gentrification is not just one story, right? It's not just their story, right? We're involved in that story. And it's allowing us the face of our enemies, just in the way that we saw it in the diagram, right? Having the faces of our enemies become more and more visible, right? As these progressive politicians get put to task, right? In seeing the contradictions, the urban working class of Los Angeles has the opportunity to strike back against that, right? And so then to conclude, gentrification is sometimes talked about in thorny ways, as sort of like, oh, am I a gentrifier? Or, what am I supposed to do if I'm outside of here or whatever? Me, for example, I was raised here in LA, but am I a gentrifier if I'm like this and this and that, right? There's all these conversations. Our whole conversation today has been talking about it in a bigger, we never mentioned the individual gentrifier, right? We're mentioning class forces of two kinds. Their class forces and our class forces, right? We have to think about it collectively, the way the structures are opening the camp up for a class struggle between two camps, right? And so then, to you all, because we sometimes think about it individually, to you all who maybe you were raised here, but sometimes it's not enough to be born and raised here, because we also have to understand what's going on, right? We have to think, we have to study, we have to learn, we have to listen. And for you who have barely a couple years ago or whatever it is, right? We invite you, the people from this city who have studied the issue, who have talked to others, who are organizing actively, we invite you to respect our city, defend our city, fight for our city, love our city, and win for our city. Are we together with that? Yeah? All right, with that, thank you. If we don't have any final comments, I think we can open the Q&A. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we got some questions.
Yeah, we should have people come up and use the mic though.
Yeah. Maybe, pick up the mic, come up, take a little stroll, right? Is that what you're saying? Sorry, bro. Yeah.
Can we go back to the graph with the quadrants? So there was a quadrant graph that had like, I don't know if it was, how do I change it? Yeah, the political compass kind of graph. Can we go back to that? I have some questions about that. No, fuck that. Hate economists. Yes, go forward. That one's pretty cool. So with this, I'm wondering, how do we build out the popular power section? Because aside from Latu, it's just there are other organizations that we should be seeking power with, but it makes. I guess I'm asking, who else could we organize with or build power with under these circumstances, or should build power with under these circumstances?
Great question. Great question.
Yeah, I mean it's true. We could add a lot to the popular side. Honestly, it would be cramped, and maybe cramped in the slide. But if we were to add to the other side, it would be like fucking insane. But it's true. How? Um, I think partly to begin with is, besides the obvious, which is organizing and getting involved, etc. The analysis of the situation, because the analysis that we did of the who and the what's and the what's behind, etc., what's noticeable, what's not. Um, it's not only an analysis of our enemy, but it's an analysis of our enemy in order to understand what alliances we can form with the enemy, but also with those that are not, and to begin to explore what is in our city beyond not just organized political organization or political collectives of some kind, but also, and I think this is coming from our experience, organizing with the tenants union, um, at the ground level, at the community level, which sometimes with nonprofits it can look like them, I guess, like some like figures that's entities that seek to represent a particular community and present themselves as such. But it can also look like a neighborhood block that tends to have parties a lot and that knows a lot of their neighbors. It's a network. It could be a church. It could be all kinds of networks of community organized or popular organizations, right? And I think that's mostly what we think of when we think about the political collectives that are thinking radically about a socialist horizon, about a communist horizon, but we're also thinking about the way in which the popular class is collectivized in some way, and how can we establish an encounter between these two forces, a political encounter, right?
I think just want to give a concrete example I just thought of to foreground the need to create alliances, but also be very, very, very strategic and critical about with who, because I think logically a lot of us think, oh yeah, more unions, world is better. Everyone forms unions, the world is better. Well, actually, when we were at the city council hearing about the H Hotel, they were going to demolish an RSO building to make a quote unquote affordable housing development. We were surprised to see that there were like a dozen people from the Carpenters Union who we were speaking against. They were in favor of the development because that's more jobs and money for their union. This is clearly a problem, right? This is clearly a contradiction between what Latu wants and what the Carpenters Union wants. And I think that is the importance of creating a holistic analysis of the conditions of our city and actually being able to come together and articulate something so that we're not playing whack-a-mole with each other.
I just wanted to say bye to him before he left. Thanks to, but yeah, he just left. But thanks to Paulo, he did a wonderful job and he got to leave without. But yeah, and symbolically we can honor his contribution. Thank you, Zarita.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a couple of things. Zarita Jones here with Latu, with Ace, and quite a few others. Strategic is the word that you used. And what we have to realize is that Latu is autonomous. Each one of our locals caters to the situations that are going on in our neighborhood, but that doesn't mean we can't go to the old way and support the other locals with their fights. And it's the same way with other organizations. We may have a fight, but if we reach out and grab Sage, and Sage does what it does, and we reach out and we grab Ace, and they do what they do. The very first time I ever organized with Ace, they said, Zarita, if you can get 10 people to get on this bus with us to Sacramento, we're going to go fuss and holler at the governor, right? Well, I got 12 red shirts, right, to go with me to mix with the yellow shirts. So when we were in those meetings, it was yellow and it was red. And sometimes we need to understand that each and every one of us has a purpose. We're boots on the ground, they're buses to Sacramento. And I remember right before COVID in 2019, all of us got together and we shut downtown LA down. They didn't realize it. They didn't understand what was happening. It was Latu. It was ACE. It was Unite Here. It was UTLA, the teachers union. No one went home that day. When I turned on my GPS, the entire downtown was red because they had to listen to us. And we still got to remember that. We just need to organize, be strategic, let each of the groups do what they do. But when we have one unified fight, let's do it. My second one is very quick. Gentrification is serious business. But what we've been doing in the Crenshaw corridor is we're not opposed to new people coming in. We're opposed to the displacement of the old people. And one of the things that we propose to city council, to the mayors, if you want to build a 500 unit complex, 250 of them have to be truly, deeply affordable. Truly, deeply affordable. That means 30% of someone's income, 40% of someone's income. We're not talking about the people that make $104,000 that can rent this place. And we make it mandatory. Nothing gets built unless it's 50%, 10% out the door.
Go ahead and come up. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I just have a question because, like, when we were talking, a lot of the things that we were like talking about what the tenants union has done in the past has been about trying to like voice demands and get politicians like in city council to make the changes. But I'm wondering if there's also like planning and organizing and strategy for not just like asking like city council reps or existing structures to make changes, but for like not like to voice demands, but to actually like make the decisions as like tenants and renters. So I'm asking like, what's the strategy for organizing in Latu for creating like what we'd call like a direct democracy or like neighborhood councils or all that?
Thank you so much.
Does it work? Okay. Great question. So today's presentation was mainly on trying to arrive at an understanding of gentrification as a phenomenon, right? And we couldn't help ourselves but make it a lot about Latu. We're Latu organizers, and we understand ourselves as in the middle of that, right? But if we had more time to talk about Latu itself, then we would sort of unfold a lot of the sort of organizational intricacies that are involved. That here, since we were talking about things happening at the city and neighborhood level or whatever, right? We were talking so much about us and our relationship to that, but not so much internally and what we're doing on the everyday. So just briefly to give you, that is the project that we understand ourselves as trying to put together. Precisely what you're talking about. And you know, we organize buildings, and sometimes those buildings become block committees sometimes, and then those block committees and buildings associations, neighborhood associations, etc., all come together in locals based on different neighborhoods in LA. And all of those internally, we attempt to. It's very difficult because we live in a capitalist society, so we can't just start creating our own little world, right? But we labor to establish democratic structures within our chapters, which again are coming together of neighborhood committees that have an understanding of what their community needs, an understanding of what their neighborhood needs, right? And so we come together and we discuss the problems that we have, and we discuss how to go about the solutions. And in terms of solutions, in fact, we very rarely make demands of the city. Sometimes we do, but it's very, very rare. Our everyday work is mostly direct action focused. So it's either For example, if the landlord is not, there's two things. So one, if the landlord is not doing, what he's supposed to do, whatever, we may, instead of like trying to petition the city that to make sure that the city disciplines the landlord or whatever, what we do is we discipline the landlord. Is we, for example, sometimes we visit their homes and protest directly in front of their, make a whole scene right in front of their homes, in front of their neighbors, so they can be shamed. We do that, and rent strikes. So totally, bringing it to having them confront our power, which is our the money that we pay them, the money that they live off of, right? So rent strikes, and then we also sometimes also practice forms of making repairs ourselves, as opposed to once the landlord fails us, once the manager fails us, once the LAHD fails us, the city fails us, etc. We come to an understanding as tenants that we have no choice but to do it ourselves, right? And so then there we're building that participatory that culture of participatory popular democracy within our chapters, and we hope to make further inroads into that, further and further as we grow more powerful, hopefully, make further inroads into that.
Because we mentioned earlier, we can't have these other entities that don't really know what's going on to speak for us. We need to speak for ourselves. But I mean, there's another problem though, is that if you grew up disenfranchised, working class, poor, you don't know what's going on, and that's not to say anti-poor, but that's just that's what happens when you grow up poor and in a bad area. You don't know what's going on. So that it's what we do to build popular democracy. We have to teach. We have to be engaged in popular education. Something in the last slide. I don't know if you're able to go to the last slide, Kat, but something that we learned in organizing is that one of the Hillside Via tenants, she actually was originally from the place where the Staples Center was. So she got she's facing eviction again. So she's getting displaced from one iconic, notorious, infamous development thing to another infamous development thing. And the point that I'm trying to make by mentioning that is that this whole presentation didn't come from like reading books, like it came from organizing. It came from going and knocking doors in Hillside Via or knocking doors wherever and learning that this affordable housing shit is a contradiction. It's a huge thing that otherwise, if we weren't actually on the boots doing organizing and being in solidarity with the poor and learning about what's going on, we would think that this affordable housing thing is like, oh yeah, that sounds dope. Like, yeah, let's do that, But obviously we live in a society where the problems that the poor and oppressed are going through, that never makes the news. Like that, no one ever knows. No one actually knows what's going on. No one gives them a voice to say anything. So that's why we have to go there and be in solidarity with them and organize together.
And then we finish. Oh yeah. Do you want to do that really quickly, and then we go see? Sorry.
I just wanted to say for what you guys are from the K-Town.
Yeah.
Like, what other communities does your guys' union service, and how can we get involved?
Okay. So yeah, we're from the K-Town local chapter. We have a couple of other various. So like there's one on the east side, serving Boyle Heights area, East LA as well. There's one in downtown. There's one in East Hollywood. There's one in Northeast LA. There's one in South Central. There's one in the West Side. There's one serving Baldwin Park. Lemert Crenshaw, and then there's a couple more. So we, as a union, we're very much sort of. It kind of depends on where you live. depends on where you live, that you can get into contact with some of the organizers in those areas. Sometimes those locals have public meetings that you can attend. Sometimes they don't. Um, it's a little bit word of mouth, and part of that is in some locals, and part of that is not for any gatekeeping reason, but rather, or maybe, I don't know. It's because we try to emphasize organic ties in the neighborhood that get us word of mouth leads. But some of us are also experimenting with public. So we'll have events, like that we post up. So like if you keep up with us, there are events, you can talk to the organizers, and then you can sort of get clued into the meetings that are happening at the neighborhood level in all of those locals. So, and also LATenantsUnion.com, I think, or .org, sorry, .org, has like a sign up sheet also where you can volunteer to like pay dues into the organization, and that helps us a lot. That helps us out a lot. We're an independent organization. We've been talking so much about nonprofits. We don't take money from anyone. We only take money from our members. Literally, we're member funded, right? And so that allows us to keep our radical independence. And yeah, that helps out a lot for all the stuff that we do. So if you want to go, if you guys are interested in making that contribution, you can find that online. If you're interested in organizing with us, we're here still also, come talk to us, and follow your local chapter on wherever it is, Instagram, wherever. Follow the events that are going on, attend them, and then you get to figure out how they're structured.
I just wanted to share. Can we go back to the slide that had Vienna on it? Okay. Oh, Vienna? That one. I actually went there. That is 2,000 units that was built of social housing. And it's sitting right next to a metro hub where everybody there, you see the swimming pools on top? Mandatory 50% green space. Everybody only pays 30% of their income. Everybody has a pool. And there's a preschool on the bottom floors for the people. I went to Vienna for 10 days to study social housing because they've been doing it for 100 years. They've already made the mistakes. They bumped their heads enough for all of us. And there's two things that I'm going to take and share with you because it's in the, tenants' rights, housing, habitability arena. They don't have to move. Once they get into that housing, if they sweep floors for a living and they only make $1,000, their rent is $333. And that's the way it stays. I don't care if they become owner of that company, they still pay the $333 because that's where they qualify. If they want to move out and do better, they can. They can leave that unit to their child if they have one. They can give it to their sister if they have one. They can give it to their elderly mom if they have one. They figured it out. And literally what I found out, the way that they support tenants is they have a team of lawyers and they keep the owners honest. If there's one clause in their contract or rental agreement that's adverse to tenants, they get charged 100,000 euros straight off the bat. They would put the tenants union out of business. And the reason why is if there were 8 clauses in that same contract, they get charged 800,000 euros. And if they cannot pay that, they straight take their building. They're like, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Landlord, you were doing this to the tenants. You can't be a landlord anymore. We're taking this building from you. We're not going to give it back. You could try again in 5 years. So they're not allowed to own anything for 5 years when they do that. Oh, that's a whole history of 100 years. No, no, no. And you can actually study this because we've actually wrote a report. One of the other things I'd like to share is um, they don't. What do you call that when they're constantly bothering us on how we live? You got too many plants, you got too many dogs, the harassment, straight harassment. They don't have to deal with that. When I went there, everybody that wanted a dog was walking their dog. Everybody that wanted plants on their balconies, and that's what you're looking at. You're looking at those private plants and trees on their balcony. Nobody told them they had too many. Everybody had a balcony to get fresh air. They built the housing the way people want to live, and then they don't displace them when they get there. If you just come to the country, sure, you need a sponsor for a couple of years, but after 2 years, you could qualify and get social housing. All they ask you to do is have a job. And like I said, they don't care if you sweep. As long as you have one and you can pay that 30%, you got housing. Lastly, am I holding you guys up? Okay. Lastly, when they get ready to build something like this, they have a budget. They don't let developers come in and tell you, oh, it's going to be 500, 600, 800,000 dollars per unit, and the city goes to pay that. They bring in a bunch of people. They say, this is what we need. This is what we're going to spend. And they bring everybody to the table. All of the trash people that's going to be taking the trash from the tenants. They bring all the utilities that's going to be supplying these buildings. They bring Metro to put a station right next door. Everybody comes to the table. And if a developer says, oh, I could do this, but it's going to cost this, and it's not within their budget, they tell that developer to kick rocks. And the only people that stay in the room are the ones that are going to do it the way that they asked, with the prices that they asked, and then they see which one comes out best. And that stops all of that. They don't pay prices like we pay here. So all I'm saying is it can be done. It is done. We just need to demand that it's done here. Whew.
Thank you, Sarita. I don't have any comments.
All right. Thank you so much, Serena. Yeah. But to the comrade's point, it requires an intense amount of popular forces to be able to defend those wins, right? When the class enemy wants to attack these kinds of projects, right? The gains that we can make, we need the people backing that. We need the people on the streets. We need the people organized to defend those kinds of gains. We're going to close because it's about that time. But I don't know what you guys were trying to. Oh yeah, certainly. Not about to close up.
I know, but it'll tie it up. So basically, I also was in Vienna recently for a May Day. And what's super incredible about that is I never want to pull inspiration from Europe for anything ever. They're not who I look to. But it is interesting to look at their conditions because it's very similar to the conditions here in the United States. And this housing project wasn't necessarily a thing that just existed in a vacuum. What's super cool is we understand that housing is intersectional with education and healthcare and all these things. And what's super interesting, I don't know about in Vienna, but in Salzburg and in Graz, which are also cities in Austria, their Communist Party is making insane gains using housing and education and things like this. So the people getting united and building these parties are what help keep these places open and thriving and what keeps people from being able to enact laws. So I think it's super, I thought that was super interesting. I do think that like Austria is a really specific case that does have like a lot that we can learn from, but the party is what helps boost it up, and that unified political line is what will defend these wins. So that was just something I.
Thank you, Savannah. That's correct. To defend the gains we win for housing, and then hopefully we don't just want housing, we want the world, right? So we'll end there, guys. Thank you guys so much. Erica says yes on 33. Proposition 33. That's right. It's true. It's an advance for rent control. We need that.